Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up important articles of the day from the newspaper and discuss them in detail as per the demands of Civil Services exam. Articles covered today are displayed on your screen and their notes in PDF and Word format are provided in the description box down below. Without further ado, let us begin. Starting off with the first article of the day, which appeared in page 8 and 9 of the Hindu newspaper. There are seemingly two different issues covered in this article. First is about an ethnic violence in Manipur, and second is about a section of wrestlers who are protesting against the Wrestling Federation of India's president. These seemingly two different articles about protests on two different places in the country, that is in Delhi and in Manipur, have one thing in common. That is the influence of pressure groups on Indian polity. This topic becomes important because UPSC in GS Mains Paper 2 has mentioned pressure group and formal and informal associations along with their role in Indian polity. While in previous year question of 2017 and 2013 in GS Paper 2 in mains examinations, questions were asked on pressure groups and their influence on Indian political process. Thus, the context of this article remains the influence of pressure groups in states such as Manipur and Delhi. In Manipur, the All Tribal Student Union is protesting against the move to concede a demand for scheduled tribe status to the Meitei community following a High Court order. Whereas in Delhi, a group of wrestlers are protesting against Wrestling Federation of India's president who has been accused of sexual harassment. In the scope of this discussion, we will first describe the purpose of pressure groups. Moving forward, we will discuss in detail about the features of such pressure groups, different types of pressure groups, as well as the role and function that they perform. Further, we will also discuss their impact on the democracy, both positive and negative aspect. Following which, we will discuss the nature of pressure groups that exist in India as well as their comparison between pressure groups in India and United States. After which, we will conclude. Issues covering both Manipur violence and wrestlers' protest have been covered in previous editions of DNS. Please have a look at them to get a comprehensive overview of both these topics. Before discussing about pressure groups, we need to understand what is a pressure group. A pressure group is an organized group of people that aims to influence public opinion or policies of the government. It includes churches and charities, businesses and trade associations, trade unions and professional associations, as well as think tanks of various complexions, etc. Now, what is the purpose of a pressure group? Although some pressure groups were set up for the specific purpose of influencing government policies, there are many pressure groups who exist for other purposes and only engage in politics as a secondary or an associated activity. As pressure groups exert influence from the outside, they do not therefore put candidates up for election. In that sense, pressure groups remain a part of civil society. These groups they use various methods to achieve their aims such as lobbying, research, media campaigns, policy briefs, and polls. Therefore, pressure groups can act as a channel of communication between people and government. Now, pressure groups are defined by following key features. The first is that they remain external to the government. Pressure groups do not make policy decisions, but rather they try to influence those who make policies. In that sense, they remain external to the government. The second is that they typically have a narrow issue focus. In some cases, they may focus on a single issue, for instance, opposing a planned road development. The third is that they have a shared belief or interest. The members of pressure groups are united by either a shared feeling in a particular cause or common sense of interest. People with different ideological and party preferences may thus work happily together as members of a same pressure group. Hence, each pressure group organizes itself keeping in view certain interests and tries to adopt the structure of power in the political system. In every government and political party, there are clashing interest groups. These groups try to dominate the political structure and see that groups whose interests clash with theirs are suppressed. In that way, pressure groups serve to protect their own interest. Fourth is that pressure group try to follow modern means of exerting pressure without fully giving up the traditional or old ways of operation. They adopt techniques such as financing of political parties, sponsoring their close candidates at the time of election, and maintaining relations with bureaucracy. Whereas traditional methods include exploitation of caste, creed, and religious feelings to promote their interest. Now, there are various ways to classify pressure group on basis of their structure and organization. These are interest and cause groups and insider or outsider groups. Let us first take a look on interest and cause groups. The interest or cause classification is based on the purpose of groups in question. It therefore reflects the nature of groups' goals, the kind of people who belong to these groups, and their motivation for joining these groups. Interest groups are groups that represent a particular section of societies. They may represent workers, employers, consumers, or ethnic or religious groups, and so on. Interest groups have following features. First, they are concerned to protect or advance the interest of their members. The membership of these groups are limited to people in a particular occupation, career, or economic position. Members of these groups are motivated by material self-interest. Trade unions, business corporations, trade associations, and professional bodies are prime example of these kind of interest groups. They are also called sectional groups because they represent a particular section of population. These interest groups can be classified into four categories. The first, institutional interest groups. These groups are formally organized, which consist of professionally employed persons. They are part of a government machinery and hence they try to exert their influence, and also they have much autonomy. These groups include political parties, bureaucracies, armed forces, churches, etc. An example of institutional groups can be IAS or IPS associations. Whenever such associations raise protest, they do so by employing constitutional means and in accordance with rules and regulations. The second are associational interest groups. These are organized specialized groups formed for interest articulation, but they pursue limited goals. These include trade unions, organizations of businesses and industrialists. Some examples include Indian Chamber of Commerce, trade unions, student unions, etc. The third are economic interest groups. These are groups that have analogy with individual self-representation. In such type of groups, perpetual infiltrations such as riots, demonstrations are observed. These groups are formed in shape of a movement demonstrations, signature campaigns, street corner meetings, etc. Their activities might be constitutional or unconstitutional. The fourth are non-associational interest groups. These groups are primarily based on kingship and lineage and are ethnic, religional, status, or class based groups that articulate interest on the basis of individual, family, or religious heads. These groups they have informal structures. These include caste groups, language groups, etc. While there are cause groups as well, which are groups that are based on shared attitudes or values rather than common interest. The causes they seek to advance are many and various. They range from charity activities, poverty reduction, education, environment, to human rights, transparency, and governance. Cause groups have following features. They seek to advance a particular idea or a principle. Membership of these groups are open to all, and members are motivated by moral or altruistic concerns. Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan or MKSS can be cited as a prime example for a cause based group that seeks to promote transparency in governance. Other examples include PETA, India Against Corruption, etc. Second type of pressure groups are insider or outsider groups. The insider or outsider distinction is based on groups' relationship with the government. It therefore affects strategies adopted by these groups and their statuses, whether they will be considered legitimate or established. Insider groups are the groups that are consulted by the government on regular basis. They operate inside the decision making process. They may also sit on the government policy committees and agencies and have links with parliamentary select committees. Therefore, the insider pressure groups have a better chance of creating an impact on how the policy shapes up, as they have been consulted at various stages of policy formulation. Whereas, outsider group on the other hand are not so closely involved with the government, and they find it harder to get their voices heard in their higher echelon of policy making. They are kept or they choose to remain at arm's length from the government. They therefore try to exert influence indirectly, that is via mass media or through public opinion campaigns. One such examples of an outsider group is Association for Democratic Reforms, which has been pushing for reforms in the way representatives are elected by the citizens of India. But many a times, many of these groups employ both insider and outsider tactics. These certainly applies in the case of a high-profile insider group, which recognizes the ability to mount a public opinion and a media campaign to strengthen their hand when it comes to bargaining with the government. Now, after we have learned about the types of pressure groups, let us take a look at the roles and functions of such pressure groups. The first function that a pressure group performs is of representation. Pressure groups provide a mouthpiece for the groups and interests that are not adequately represented through electoral process or by political parties. This occurs because groups are concerned with specific rather than general concerns. In other words, while political parties attempt to broaden their appeal in order to attract all the voters, the pressure groups, they articulate the views and interests of a particular group and remain focused on specific causes. It has even been argued that pressure groups provide an alternative to formal representation process through what has been called a functional representation. However, questions have been raised about the capacity of pressure group to carry out representation because pressure groups have low level of internal democracy, thus creating a possibility that they express the views of their leaders and not their members. While the influence of pressure groups on government does not always reflect in their membership size or popular support. The second function that these pressure groups perform is that of political participation. Pressure groups have been increasingly important agent of political participation. Moreover, a range of pressure groups, mainly outside pressure groups, exert influence precisely by mobilizing popular support through activities such as petitions, marches, demonstrations, and other forms of political protest. Such forms of political participation have been particularly attractive to young people. The third function that they perform is that of education. Much of what public knows about politics is through pressure groups of one kind or the another. Many pressure groups operate largely through their ability to communicate with the public and raise political consciousness. Groups therefore often devote significant resources to carry out research, maintaining websites, commenting on government policy, and using high profile academics, scientists, or even celebrities to get their view across. An emphasis is therefore placed on cultivating the expert authority. The fourth function that these groups perform is the policy formulation. Although pressure groups by definition are not policymakers, this does not prevent them from participating in policy making process. The pressure groups are a vital source of information and advice to the governments. Many pressure groups are therefore regularly consulted in the process of policy formulation. While government policy increasingly is being developed
through these policy networks. An example of such group is Observer Research Foundation or the ORF, which works on policy issues primarily related to foreign affairs. The fifth function that these groups perform is that of policy implementation. The role of some pressure groups extends beyond trying to shape the content of public policy to playing a role in putting the policy into practice. Groups such as Akshay Patra are responsible for designing policies regarding to midday meal, while also they act as implementing agencies. However, questions have been raised about the groups in implementing policy. Some have criticized such groups for being very close to the government, therefore endangering their independence, while others have argued that policy implementation gives such groups an unfair political leverage in influencing policy decisions. Now, after discussing the roles and functions of pressure groups, let us discuss how such pressure groups influence democracy. Now, how does a pressure group promote a democracy? They do so by supplementing electoral democracy. Pluralists have often highlighted the advantages of group representation over representation through elections and political parties. Pressure groups may either supplement electoral democracy or they may replace the political parties as a main way in which people express their views and interests. Pressure groups keep in touch with the public opinion in between the elections. One of the weaknesses of election is that they take place after a few years. By contrast, a pressure group may force the government to engage in an ongoing dialogue with the people in which the interest or views of such sections cannot be ignored. India Against Corruption anti-corruption movement was one such example where the pressure groups made the government aware of the rising sentiment of general public against the corruption in public life. Pressure groups also give political voice to minority groups and articulate concerns that are overlooked by political parties. Pressure groups are therefore more effective in articulating concerns about issues such as environment, civil liberties, poverty, violence against women, and plight of elderly. Organizations such as SEVA or National Commission for Women have campaigned for women-friendly issues such as Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. The second way in which pressure groups promote democracy is through widening the political representation. The level of political representation is an important indicator of the health of democracy. Pressure groups have thus become an increasingly effective agents of political participation. Not only has single issue politics proved to be a popular, but the grassroots activism and decentralized organization of many campaigns have proven to be attractive to youngsters as well as to people who have been disillusioned by the conventional politics. The third function that pressure groups perform, which promotes democracy, is by ensuring competition and a debate. Pressure groups help to promote democracy by widening the distribution of political power. They do this in part because these pressure groups compete against each other. This ensures that no group or interest can remain dominant permanently. The fourth way in which these pressure groups promote democracy is through promotion of education. Pressure groups promote political debates, discussions, and arguments. Thus, in doing so, they create a better informed and more educated electorate, which, on the other hand, helps to improve the quality of public life. Now, after understanding how pressure groups promote democracy, let us take a look on how these pressure groups threaten democracy. Some scientists and politicians are of the view that pressure groups are non-democratic or even anti-democratic. A 2014 Intelligence Bureau report also highlighted that foreign funded NGOs were negatively impacting the economic development of India. The way in which pressure groups threaten the democracy are the first, that is, pressure groups increase or widen the political inequality. A central argument of a group of people is that, far from dispersing power more widely and empowering ordinary citizens, pressure groups tend to empower who are already powerful. They therefore increase rather than reduce the political inequality. In practice, the most powerful pressure groups tend to be one who possess money, expertise, institutional leverage, and privileged links with the government. The second criticism that such pressure groups face is that they exert behind the scenes influence on the government policy. Regardless of which groups are the most powerful, pressure groups' influence is exerted in a way that is not subjected to much scrutiny or public accountability. They usually exert influence behind closed doors. This particularly applies in the case of insider groups whose representatives move around the corridors of power which are unseen by the public and away from media scrutiny. Insider links between these groups and executive, they bypass parliament scrutiny, thus rendering the parliamentary process as insufficient in controlling or demanding the accountability from the government. The third criticism that they face is that they exercise non legitimate power. Critics have often questioned whether pressure groups exercise rightful or legitimate power in any circumstances. This is because, unlike conventional politicians, pressure groups' leaders are not elected. Pressure groups are therefore not publicly accountable, meaning that the influence that they exert are not democratically legitimate. The problem is confounded by the fact that only a few pressure groups operate on a basis of internal democracy. The fourth criticism that they face is that lead to tyranny of the minority. Pressure groups, by their very nature, represent minorities rather than majorities. Pressure groups thus try to prevent the tyranny of majority, that in perhaps is one of the most inevitable feature of an electoral democracy. However, such pressure groups may create an opposite problem. Minority views or special interest may prevail at the expense of interest of majority or the larger public. Now, after establishing how these pressure groups influence democracy, let us take a look on the nature of pressure groups in India. There are different types of pressure groups that are found in India. The first are business groups, which are the most important, most organized, and most effective. They are independent of political parties and have enough resources with them to safeguard their own interest. The most important business groups in India are Confederation of Indian Industry or CII, Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry or FICCI, and Associated Chamber of Commerce or ASSOCHAM. These groups, they exert varied kind of pressures and they try to influence planning, licensing bodies and economic ministries. The business persons are usually present in different legislatures at central and state level, and every ministry in the government of India has some kind of consultative committees and business groups are represented in those committees. During pre-budget meetings, the finance ministry interacts with this kind of groups to secure suitable inputs which thus helps in budget formulation. The second kind of pressure groups are trade unions. Trade unions have been present in India even before independence. Groups such as All India Trade Union Congress was established in the year 1920, whereas Indian National Trade Union Congress was established in 1947. The emergence of communist movement also played an important role in the growth of these trade unions. However, trade unions in India are closely affiliated to political parties, and many national parties have their own federations of trade unions. In fact, very little amount of independence from political parties exists in trade union. These trade union, when required, can be very vocal or militant in their action to meet their demands. They work through weapons of strike and have been able to achieve monetary gains in terms of wage increase, bonuses, changes in wage structure, etc. India has witnessed trade unions resorting to demonstrations, during disinvestment by the government in public sector undertakings. Despite certain institutional limitations such as ideological difference, internal splits, external pressures, lack of international backing, these trade unions they have exerted significant pressure at various stages of policy formulations. The third kind of pressure groups that exist in India are the peasant organizations. The rise of peasant organizations in India have been mainly due to factors such as abolition of zamindari system and other land reform measures, implementation of Panchayati Raj and Green Revolution movements. They have gained huge powers since 1960s. Different parties have got their own peasant organizations. Like trade unions, there are no peasant organization which may be completely independent of a political party. Peasant groups have been mainly organized on basis of territory rather than on all India basis. Their demands related to procurement prices of agricultural products, fertilizer subsidy, tenancy rights, electricity charges, etc. Bharatiya Kisan Union or BKU is considered as the most significant pressure group of peasant organization, which was most apparent during the recent farmers' protest against the farm laws. The interplay of language, caste, weak financial positions, etc. have been greatly responsible for lack of a multiple national level peasant organizations or pressure groups. The fourth type of pressure group are student organizations. They have been acting as pressure groups both prior and post independence. After independence, the political parties continue to be affiliated with these student organizations, such as Akhil Bharatiya Vidya Parishad is closely related to BJP, whereas National Student Union of India is closely related to Indian National Congress. On the other hand, AISF as Student Federation of India are closely associated with Communist Party of India. The activities of these kind of pressure groups are not just related to educational issues. They try to pressurize governmental policy on various crucial issues such as fees, hostel facilities, curriculum, etc. The fifth and probably the most important type of pressure groups in India are community based associations. These community groups are organized on basis of caste, class or religion. Some example of these caste-based association are Jat Mahasabha, Scheduled Caste Federation, while among other organizations such as Vishwa Hindu Parishad, Northern and Southern India Christian Conference represent interests that are supposed to safeguard respective religions. Now before concluding, let us take a comparison of pressure groups in India and in the West. India and most countries of the West are democracies with either presidential or parliamentary form of governance. However, there are some differences in the role of pressure groups in these respective democracies. The first is the significance of pressure groups. The American pressure groups are regarded as the fourth organ of the government. But on the other hand, the Indian pressure groups are not able to play such a significant role in Indian politics. While the targets of such pressure groups in India have been the members of the government, both the cabinet or the members of civil services. Members of the cabinet and civil services are main targets of such pressure groups for lobbying purposes rather than the parliament. However, in the United States, the targets of American pressure groups are the Congress and its associated committees rather than the president for lobbying purposes. The third point of comparison between them are themes or issues raised by such pressure groups. Indian pressure groups are based on caste, religion, or region and are more powerful than the modern groups such as business organizations, which are more powerful in countries such as USA. While another aspect of such comparison is the domain of foreign policy. A significant feature of American pressure groups is that the pressure groups take interest in foreign policy issues, while in India, pressure groups do not take such interest on foreign policy matters. Comparatively, Indian pressure groups are concerned more with domestic policies and problems. However, in general, despite the differences, Democratic politics presupposes the crucial role of pressure groups for serving the interests of different sections of the society. To conclude, pressure groups are now considered as an helpful and an indispensable element of democratic process. Society have become highly complex and individual they cannot pursue the interests of their own. Therefore, they need a support of other fellow beings in order to gain a bargaining power. This gives rise to pressure groups based on common interest. For a long time, these groups have remained unnoticed. Initially, they were considered as harmful for democratic process, but now their role in political process have become very important. Democratic politics has to be politics through consultation and negotiation, and for some amount of bargaining is also involved as well. Thus, it is very essential for the government to consult these organized groups at the time of policy formulation and implementation. Now, moving on to the second article of the day, which appeared in page 4 of today's Hindu newspaper. The article reports that the National Commission for Scheduled Castes, or the NCSC, has issued a notice to the Punjab government officials seeking an action taken report on the alleged sexual misconduct by a minister in the ruling Aam Aadmi Party government in the state of Punjab. The National Commission for Scheduled Caste is an Indian constitutional body which was established with a view to provide safeguards against exploitation of scheduled castes and Anglo-Indian communities. In this context, Article 338 of the Indian Constitution, special provisions were made to promote and protect the social, educational, economic, and cultural interests. Institutions are often distinguished by whether they perform a protective or a promotional role. The National Commission for Scheduled Caste is clearly more of a protective institution, though it does monitor the progress of promotional policy initiatives emanating from other state agencies. While its creation was mandated by the Constitution, neither the responsibility of promoting the welfare of scheduled caste nor that of protecting them against injustices has been vested exclusively in this institution. Indeed, though it enjoys a constitutional status, the recommendations of this commission are advisory rather than mandatory. In this regard, UPSC in GS Paper 2 has mentioned appointment to various constitutional posts, powers, functions and responsibilities of various constitutional bodies. Whereas in mains paper in the year 2020, a question appeared on National Commission for Women, while in the year 2018, a question appeared on National Commission for Scheduled Castes, and it asked us to examine the implementation of constitutional reservations for scheduled caste in religious minority institutions. So, we can see that the coverage of constitutional bodies is important from the perspective of mains and prelims as well. So, in this discussion, we are going to cover the details about the National Commission for Scheduled Castes, its functions and powers. Further, we will also evaluate the performance of this commission and then suggest a way forward to improve the functioning of the National Commission for Scheduled Castes. The National Commission for Scheduled Castes is a constitutional body which was set up under the Article 338 of the Constitution of India. It was set up in the year of 2004 to investigate and monitor all matters relating to constitutional safeguards provided to the scheduled castes and to protect their rights. The main function of the National Commission for Scheduled Castes are as follows. First, it investigates and monitors all matters relating to safeguards provided for the scheduled caste under the Constitution or under any law for the time being in the force. Second, it inquires into specific complaints with respect to deprivation of safeguards and rights of the scheduled castes. Third, it participates and advises in the planning process for socio-economic development of the scheduled castes. Fourth, it evaluates the progress of the development of scheduled castes under the union or any state. Fifth, it makes recommendation for the effective implementation of safeguards for the scheduled castes. The Commission primarily has 4 areas of functioning. that is, service safeguards, education, economic developments, and atrocities. Among these four, the service safeguards wing is the most active one. It deals with complaints that relate mostly to promotions, discrimination, and harassment on various counts, institution of disciplinary proceedings on flimsy grounds, the conduct of departmental inquiries in an unfair manner, adverse entry in the annual confidential reports, transfer to far off places or insignificant positions, delay in payment of retirement benefits, delay in the completion of departmental inquiries, and so forth. The Commission has also succeeded in institutionalizing the system of liaison officers and special scheduled caste and scheduled tribe cells in all ministries and public sector enterprises, which are there for speedy and effective resolution of all grievances of the employees belonging to these particular communities. The Commission also has a power of a civil court, thereby meaning that it can summon witnesses, record evidences, and issue orders. It also submits an annual report to the President and the Parliament based on its performance, and in these reports, the Commission provides few recommendations as well. The National Commission plays an important role in protecting the rights and interests of scheduled castes, which are one of the most vulnerable and marginalized section of Indian society. It ensures that the constitutional safeguards provided to them are effectively implemented and any violations are addressed promptly. Now, let us look at the evaluation of the performance of this commission. There are a variety of conflicts that characterize the functioning of this commission. First is that there has historically prevailed a conflict between the commission and its nodal ministry, which is the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. This has often taken the form of conflict between the minister and the chairperson of National Commission for Scheduled Castes. Conflict between the chairperson and members has also tended to characterize this commission because of the politicized nature of appointments to it. The second is that by choosing to interpret its constitutional mandate narrowly, the Commission has laid itself upon the charge of elite bias. The fact that it is the most effective in the area of service related safeguards speaks for itself. Third is that the Commission's competence in settling the service related grievance may be contrasted with its inability to reduce the incidences of atrocities and violence against Dalits, or effectively fight against the persistent scourge of untouchability. A particular commission seems to be only good as its members. Hence, the fourth evaluation of its performance is based on the matters of appointment to the commission. The lack of institutionalization in its procedures of appointment to the commission has meant that competent and committed members are less likely to be appointed, especially in a political and policy environment where the membership of the commission becomes a convenient sinecure for unemployable politicians or a temporary shelf for bureaucrats belonging to these groups. The most significant handicap of the commission is the fact that the decisions of these commissions are not binding. It means they are recommendatory in nature. Though it is not explicitly stated in the Constitution under the Article 338, it is deeply ambiguous on this issue. It gives the Commission quasi-judicial powers of investigation but does not mention the form in which the Commission's judgment of a particular issue would be delivered and implemented. Further, the quality of reports in terms of data that they contain and the manner in which the data is being organized has been declining over the years. Also, the Commission is supposed to prepare an annual report for presentation to the Parliament. These reports are often tabled 2 or more years later after they have been submitted to the President. Even when these reports are tabled in the Parliament, they are frequently not discussed in the floor of the House. There is no evidence in the Lok Sabha debates of a discussion of any of the four special reports. Only one has an all India scope, and this is all about the service safeguards. Now, let us discuss the way forward which can be implemented to improve the functioning of this commission. It is often argued that the Commission is a paper tiger, which needs to be armed with greater powers. The argument is premised on the fact that an inadequate appreciation of the location of the Commission in the existing constitutional setup. To give the Commission additional powers in matters of criminal investigation, for instance, it would require it to follow prevailing rules and procedures pertaining to evidence and prosecution. These may in fact retard the effectiveness of the Commission by rendering itself vulnerable to litigations in form of appeals to higher judicial bodies, therefore nullifying its operational effectiveness and diluting its moral stature. By an amendment is required in the Article 338 itself or in the rules by which the President may fix a period of discussion of the report of this Commission in the Parliament. Also, it would be appropriate for the Commission to undertake qualitative studies by commissioning anthropologists and other social scientists to undertake such studies, and to institutionalize mechanisms by which contemporary changes and transitions in the social structure can be mirrored, recorded, and acted upon. Also, the procedure for appointment needs to be made more autonomous of the government of the day. Thus, we can say that it would be desirable for the Commission to engage in an internal evaluation of its priorities on an ongoing basis and to redefine them in a substantially more egalitarian way so as to accomplish its mandate in the spirit of which it was intended. Now, within the scope of this discussion, we have first covered about the National Commission for Scheduled Castes, especially with its functions, powers, and analysis of its effectiveness. Also, we evaluated the performance of this commission with respect to interpretation of the mandate, inability to protect the scheduled caste, the nature of appointments, and publishing of its reports. Further, we have suggested a way forward by giving it more powers by amending the Article 338 and taking qualitative studies. Further, appointment can also be made autonomous of the government.